So, ever since recently making a new Twitter, just for more, to expand my horizons, I've been introduced to the kind of discourse that I've really missed out on, that a lot of people have talked about. When it came to Twitter, a lot of people talk about Twitter being this terrible cesspool of terrible, horrible, back and forth, just rage bait arguments and all that fun stuff, and snide comments and everything like that. I've kind of avoided that by and large through my time on Twitter, but I decided now's the time. Now's the time to really explore it. And man, oh man, Gaijin Twitter has really got me going, let me tell you. So, recently it seems that there's a little bit of a back and forth, or a hot topic on Twitter, Gaijin Twitter. It kind of crosses over with Weeaboo Twitter too, talking about translation and localization and Western values, and how Japan must be protected from the encroachment of the they-them Western values. And by the tone of my voice, you can probably tell where my allegiance is in this war, this mighty war lie. Here's the thing, okay, now I'm gonna try to be as fair as possible, okay? Here's the thing. Yes, there are inevitably going to be things that are lost in translation when it comes to taking things from one fundamentally different language and going to another. Now, I don't work in the localization field, mind you. However, I did go to school for this sort of thing when it comes to history and culture, when it comes to like Japan and China especially. And I've been exposed to a lot of, well, translations of things. Heck, I mean, just for example, for a final exam, I had to take a classical Japanese excerpt of the Pillow Book and translate it to English. At first it was really difficult, but then it turned really fun. And I really enjoyed doing that, and I wish I could finish it, but the final was timed. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that a lot of things, when it comes to translation, end up inevitably being altered. I recently read a book. It's a Chinese play called The Peony Pavilion. It's considered a Chinese classic. And it's a translation done by one of the top scholars in Chinese literary studies or something like that. He translated this play, and he actually used other translations as well to help supplement his work where he felt it was okay to use it. But here's the thing that comes with translation. If you're going to translate things more directly, like, say, that book did, typically it's going to require a lot of background knowledge. Especially when it comes to Chinese literature in general. Chinese literature is a textbook example of intertextuality because of how far-reaching and some of these references go. There are so many cultural references being made to past poets and playwrights and authors, novelists, religious figures, religious anecdotes, legends, like all these things that are just ubiquitous in Chinese culture. They don't translate directly to an American, let's say, right? A modern American. So if you were to use the jump the dragon analogy to an American, they would have no idea what you're talking about if they didn't have the annotation to look it up, right? So there are a couple of different ways you can translate things. One is directly, but again, that's assuming that either you're going to use annotations to point out what's a reference, what something means, what something's calling back to, or what something is a pastiche of, and what makes so that it can be highlighted as significant or whatever, a parody, what have you. It would be like, you could do that, or you can localize. Localizing is probably one of the easiest ways to quickly bring one piece of media from a completely different culture to another one in that different culture's language and present it to them in a way that they themselves, in that time, can understand. That's the key thing here. One of the memes that people bring up, apparently, unironically, against the what localizers do, is this clip from the Pokemon anime, where it's Brock holding onigiri, which are, of course, rice balls. Everybody knows that now. And he says, in the subtitles say, "These donuts are great. Jelly-filled are my favorite." Obviously, rice balls aren't donuts, right? And we can all have a laugh. Yeah, it's kind of funny. But here's the thing. This doesn't say anything about localizers. Instead, it says a lot more about what Americans, at least, could understand, right? Because here's the thing. I'm going to bet. When did this episode of Pokemon air? 1999? 2000? Let me ask you, how many of you go to Kansas City, Nebraska? Or Nebraska, Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri, right? You go there in 1999 or 2000 and ask them where you can find the best rice ball. They're not going to know what the mutt you're talking about, bro. Come on. People back in the 90s, most Americans aren't going to know what a rice ball is unless they're part of like an Asian community, okay? They're not going to know. And so, like, sure, you could just call them onigiri or rice balls or whatever. Sure, but like, does that sound appealing to my great-grandmother? Probably not, right? Let alone a kid, right? Of course, you could say kids are sponges, right? They don't really have that kind of cultural programming yet, right? You could say that, I suppose. Some kids would be open to it. Some kids won't care, whatever. I mean, when I was a kid, when I heard them refer to it as donuts, I'm like, those are kind of weird looking donuts. I don't know if those really are. They look okay, though. They look pretty good, whatever they are. Actually, kind of look bready the way they're drawn. But the point is, the reason why they made that decision was so that there would be no confusion. It would require the least amount of explanation for what these things are, right? Because if you were to say, "Oh, I love rice balls," I mean, I guess you could say, "Well, it's self-explanatory. It's a ball of rice." But who eats balls of rice? A kid's not gonna know that. What's so great about a ball of rice? You know, and the amount of explanation it takes isn't worth going through you can't do it. That's the thing. You really can't do it. And so they opted for calling them donuts because the size of donuts, I mean, if you squint, if you're looking at it on a blurry CRT, they look like donuts, close enough. I mean, why not? I mean, white powdered donuts, I've seen them before. A lot of people have. They're delicious. So is onigiri, but I mean, the idea is it's just a snack, right? And so I didn't even know this was such a big deal. This isn't like, it doesn't matter. The point is, and of course now people look back on it and be like, they don't know. They want to call rice balls donuts. Wow, that's such a horrible, gross alteration of the original source. As if they believe that the culture that exists now existed the better part of 30 years ago. No, that's not how culture works. That's not how globalization works, right? And every country, every society has its own set of norms. Things that are considered good, things are considered not so good, things that are considered unoffensive and offensive, and so on and so forth. There are certain sensitivities that exist in other places that don't really have the same kind of impact here. in Japan. I say that because I live in Japan. For example, blackface, right? Blackface is a controversial thing in Japan because it was something that was practiced up until fairly recently, if not still. I don't think it's still done, but definitely up until, I don't know, within the last 10 years or so. I mean, and Americans will look at that and be like, what the heck are you doing? Why are you doing that? You know what that means? Well, in fact, not really. Not in Japan. In Japan, it's already a very insular country as it is. But, like, the point is that those sensitivities exist, right? Japanese people do not understand the history and what blackface means, right? They just did it. Americans do, so they don't do it. They avoid it if they can, unless they're trying to be super, super, super offensive and shocking, right? That's the point. And so, when a localizers presented information or presented something that is not really considered acceptable in the culture that media is being exported to, then you're gonna have to make some changes. And just because those changes those changes are made doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it incorrect. It doesn't make it wrong or inaccurate. All it does is gently appropriate something to better, to better cater to the culture of people that are going to be consuming it, without losing the sentiment of the original creation. And that's really the key thing here. Localization isn't just something anyone can go in and just butcher, right? I mean, people seem to think that that's what happens, but that's not what actually does. It's actually a really careful process. It's a process that requires a lot of thought and effort. Something that I'm sure people who cite memes like this from 25 years ago can't seem to grasp and are probably incapable of. But the fact that people are getting flamed on Twitter because of, like, the defense, they have the audacity to defend people who localize things. I mean, here's an example of great localization. Mega Man X5! Alright? Duff McWhalen is way cooler a name than whatever the Japanese thought of. What, Whale Flounder or whatever? Axel the Rose? Slash Grizzly? Cool. Effective. Amazing. Awesome names. I don't even like Guns N' Roses. And it's still great. Whatever the original one is, this is better. The localization is better. So sure, okay, maybe there could be some bad actors, but if you really disagree that much with what localizers do, in a lot of times in collaboration with the original creators and authors, if you really disagree with what they are doing, translate it yourself or learn the language and get the heck out. Holy my.